Let's see.
Let's start off with the two kingdoms. We'll start off with trying to understand, like you said, um, the first question of how do these kind of things happen? If what we believe to be true, which is a good and benevolent and sovereign and all powerful God controls the universe, that He created it and controls it, then how do you have a world where these things happen? Like, how do we make sense of that? Because that just seems not to be cohesive on the surface. Because it seems as if you could say there's a good God, but He might not be powerful enough to stop it, or there's a powerful God, but He's not real good, right? And there's religions out there that believe just that about God, right? And that allows them to explain these things a little bit easier than maybe Christianity. But in Christianity, we have a good and powerful God, and we believe in both. And I believe they both can be easily upheld, but not without first and foremost understanding the beginning. Right? That's why we're so big about starting point, because you can't understand these things. It's like an onion, right? You can't go 6 layers deep without looking at the first layer, because if you get down to 6 layers and you haven't looked at the first 5 layers, you can forget about it. You're going to be so lost in there. And so I think laying that first layer, that first foundation, Genesis 1 through 3, and then what happened there, and how God told us, if you do these things, this is what you ought to expect, right? I think that would be appropriate. I don't know if you want to lay it or you want me to lay it or whatever.
No, go for it.
So, I mean, very, very quickly and simply, you also can watch the 9 C's, because, me and him, this is part of the 9 C's. So if you want to know more about what we believe inside of that, we're dropping videos on the 9 C's all the time to help you understand this. So very quickly, God created the world. He created it good. He placed man inside of it to be His royal representatives in it, to represent Him and to steward it and subdue the earth. So go out and expand the garden over the earth. I'll be your king. You'll be my people. I'm producing a family. This is how you live, and it's how it leads you into the fullness of joy. This is what life is. It's dwelling with me, your king. There's one tree in the garden that you should not eat of. That is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which represents what it means to be God. And God is saying it is not good for you to play God, because when you play God, the outcome of that is death. The outcome of that is tragedy. The outcome of that is brokenness, because you're a creation. You're not the creator, right? And if you do these things, expect this to happen. And God is faithful, because He can't be anything other than faithful. And man decided to play God, and he eats of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil as he's tempted by the serpent. But instead of destroying humanity, God was good, but also faithful. So He judged humanity, escorted them out of the garden. Now they are no longer living with God in this beautiful place of goodness, but they are dwelling in their sin. But God is set forth in the garden in Genesis 3 a promise to crush the head of the serpent, to crush sin and death through the seed of the woman. He set forth this plan of redemption. But in the plan of redemption, although that is going to be the climax of Jesus crushing that, there's also this learning that is happening in mankind, this history that is being laying out, that is showing us that we are not good kings. Like, we suck at it, right? We're constantly letting each other down. We're constantly letting ourselves down. And I believe that history is so that when we one day dwell with God again, there'll be no first garden problems, right? There'll be no temptation to want to play God, because we will know what it was like when we tried to play God. We will have a whole history to know about what it was like when we tried to play God. And we'll know that God is worthy to be our king, and only He is a worthy king. And so that is when you understand that breaking point from the original kingdom of what God intends and where God is bringing us to. And then you catch us in the middle of, this is our kingdom. And God was gracious enough to let us live it out, because He could have killed us all, right? He doesn't have to let any of us take another breath, but He lets us live this out in this kingdom. But living this out with those freedoms, we also have to deal with consequences inside of these freedoms, right? You can't ask for God to restrict some people's freedom, but let me have my freedom. And, that just gets very interesting in and of itself, how we kind of maneuver through that. And like, we want justice, just not justice for me, right? And so it's like, take that person out. Show me mercy, God, right? And so it's like you got this kind of world where man is just constantly failing at being king. And then, like you said, in societies, we have people over people, and then so when these people fail, people beneath them have to deal with consequences as well. But I think that is key to understand, that breaking point from a good world to a broken world, from what God intended to what he also intended, just different, right? I don't want it to sound like God intended something and man, we usurped God's sovereignty, right? It's like, yeah, no, God had a plan in it all, and it's all plan A. So,
so just to like focus in on that a little bit, that moment in the garden there where God originally made everything and he made it good. And we created man, he made us very good. And so that's this initial state of creation is very good. But then, in this scene there in the garden when the first humans choose to disobey God and believe and trust in what the serpent presented them, but God had warned them, don't eat of that tree or you will surely die.
That's right.
And
God always warns us.
Yeah. I mean, and he that was a very good thing to do.
Yeah.
It was a loving thing to do. Don't eat of that tree or you will surely die. And maybe some people would say, why did he put the tree there to start with? But, and you could talk about that a lot more, but he warned us. And all we had to do was listen, and all would be well. But yet we decided that we knew better or wanted to find out on our own. But in the process of the sin enters into the world, and the world becomes fallen. And that's a kind of a Christian theological idea there. But before sin entered in through this decision,
death and decay, maybe. Like everything started decaying, breaking down.
Right. And so that's kind of what I'm getting at, is the nature of this when God says you will surely die. But then they didn't immediately die.
Sure.
But something happened. Something happened not only to the humans, but to all of creation. And God says there in Genesis 3, he puts a curse on creation. So in this fallen state, it's not what it was. It's not how God initially created it. It is in a corrupted, fallen is the word that we use. There is a process of decay that now has set in and works its way through the whole of everything. And, subsequently from there, then it sin and death and all of its kind of ramifications start coming into the world through humans, through our decisions and actions. But I guess we see in that this relationship that humanity is meant to have with all of creation. And so because we are now in this broken, fallen state, all of creation is broken and fallen and it is malfunctioning. It has it's been opened up to its own forms of corruption and things like sickness and disease and all forms and manner
that are forms of decay.
Right,
Sickness,
they're imperfection.
Disease, imperfection. Even the term "very good" there, like in the Hebrew, what it's recognizing is that God and man's relationship was very good. Man to man was very good. Man to creation was very good, right? So you had this 3-tier very good. And then when corruption hit, man and God, it breaks down, right? Man's hiding from God all of a sudden, and God has to come to man. And then what's the first thing that Adam does when God asks Adam about it? He's like, Eve. And Eve's like, serpent, right? and then also, like you said, now all of a sudden, the toil of the ground is going to war against Adam all the days of his life. And we all observe these things, right? Our first immediate reaction, I know mine is anyways, when something happens with me and my wife, it's like, your fault, you did this, right? It's like we observe that inside of us. We all observe the breaking down of how hard it is. I mean, I do some farming, so I really observe what it means for the weeds and in the ground to really war against you. But even in our work, right, it wars against us, and it's hard. And then we also, maybe we don't observe this is the same way that we observe the other two, but we have this void. There is something within us that we know is incomplete, right? And we would connect that with the first breaking, the breaking of God, that we're all still hiding, right? And we're all still hiding. And unless God comes to us and calls us out of the darkness into the light and tells us to take those fig leaves off, which Adam and Eve had clothed themselves. Go back and read the narrative if you don't understand what I'm saying right there. He says, take them off. And he takes an animal, which most likely was a lamb, I'm just guessing, and he clothes him with it, right? And it's such symbolism of what's coming, right? Of God saying, I'm clothing you here. I'm clothing you. I'm fixing this. And I'm going to have a whole history to basically tell the story of what I just did to the first man and the first woman, right? And we observe these things, right? Even even the secular community observes the death and the decay, and that one day, they'll say it's all coming to a heat death, right? Everything's winding down, right? With the secular community, everybody observes the human problem, right? How we're all pointing at each other and we're all not treating each other the way that God intended us to. Like God told us how to treat one another. I mean, even with the Israelites, like that's what God's doing with the Israelite community, right? I mean, you talk about this all the time. He's bringing them up out of paganism and teaching them how to be your brother's keeper, right? Second story out of the garden, Cain and Abel. Cain murders his brother. Am I my brother's keeper? The irony there is, yeah, you are. Like humanity's not individualistic. It's corporate. Like God intended it to be corporate. We were supposed to corporately dwell and reign and expand the garden together. And God instituted how we do that how we do that well, the best way possible. And we decided individually that we wanted to do it how we wanted to do it. And so now you have, like you're talking about, all these humans butting heads because we're all playing God over our own life. Sometimes Western society, even though it's the best society that you can have possible, can be the worst in that way at times. Because we all want to be our own king, right? We all want to have our own way. Well, you got 350 million people all wanting to have their own way. Ruh-roh.
Yeah. One I'm thinking as you're talking, this interesting way that what you're just saying relates to our conversation in that, firstly, we've disobeyed God, and so we don't trust Him, and so we go and we do it our own way, which is not how all this is designed to work. So it introduces this corruption, this malfunction to the whole system. So then, that you think if a machine's not working right, then it's not only is it not working right, it's like susceptible to other problems.
Oh yeah.
Then, so these other problems creep in as a result of the whole system not working right. And so with in comes death, but death works itself out in all these different forms. And so then we suffer from that. And that's God's judgment. It is the consequence of disobeying God is bad things happen. I mean, at its most fundamental, basic, way of being communicated, disobey God and bad things happen. Not just simply like Him. And we tend to think, because God will punish you. Well, actually, I mean, you bring the punishment upon yourself.
It's baked into the cake.
Yeah. It's just a natural consequence of going against the grain here. And so it brings in problems, this dysfunction, malfunctioning of creation. So sickness, disease, of all different stripes come into the picture, and we start, we have to deal with those things, and it is a form of judgment. But we might ask, people say, "Oh, is God punishing us in some kind of way?" Well, God is being faithful simply to who He is and what He said. If you eat of this, you will die. If you think that you know better than me, and then you go out and live your way versus my way, then you will die. Yep. Bad things will come flooding into your world, and you will suffer from it. So, in fact, God is actually showing Himself faithful and even good in a sense, because He's true to His word. He's being just, and He's carrying out a justice in those lawful consequences. But then also, there's this willingness of God to be merciful along the way. He didn't kill them immediately like He had the right to do, or cause them to die, or whatever God could have done to those first people as well as us. We live in disobedience and rebellion to God.
And not to cut you off, but I think that's an important place there too. The long suffering and the patience of God, it shows us something remarkable. It shows us the completion of God, right? How complete God is. Because when I don't want to be patient with my wife or with my friends or with my child, or I'm not long suffering with them, it's usually because there's something inadequate in me.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not where I need to be.
It your way.
I want it my way. Right. But in that, you see the absolute completeness of God, the holy imperfection of God. I mean, holy perfection, not imperfection, the holy perfection in God, and His ability to go, okay, like, I'm going to be patient with my creation. Like, they're going to rebel. They're going to spit in my face. They're going to crucify my son. Then I'm going to be patient with them because I'm complete, because they're not adding to me or subtracting from me. Like, I just am. Right. And so you see that, and that's a beautiful picture of God and His ability to do that, because we recognize our inability to do that. Like, I mean, you watch a man that is super intelligent, right? And that, or you take one that's super intelligent, or an MMA fighter that could whip anybody in the room, right? Both those people. And you watch a super intelligent man sit in a room with a group of 10 other intelligent people, and they're talking. And that at any given time, he could tell any one of those people where they're wrong, where they're right, just like take over the conversation. But he doesn't. He sits there, and instead he's, adding some things in where he needs to and not adding other things. And he's letting them talk, and he's just enjoying them talking, his students talking. Like, that's a man who knows who he is. Like, that man doesn't need to prove anything to anybody. Whereas you get other teachers, they're always like lording over people and stomping out people all the time. And you're like, he's kind of insecure in his knowledge, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's what we see in God. Like, He's not insecure because He's complete. Like, He's just like, okay, like, whatever, like, go humanity. Like, and like you're saying, it's like, if you want to believe you're an eagle and jump off a building and you can fly, it's built into the cake. You're going to hit the ground and die. Right? It's like, but it's kind of built into it, like you're talking about. Like, and who knows, we might think we're eagles before too long, because we think other things about ourselves that ain't real, logical right now too. So not to go down that stream.
Yeah. And, we see that in this, like going back to the relational aspect of it all that you're talking about, the first problem is our dysfunctional relationship with God. And because of that invites. So when we're with Him and in Him, He promises, to clothe us and protect us with His goodness, which is protection and safety and security and provision and all these things that He promises throughout the Bible to His people, that they'll be protected from those things, if not in the temporal world. Ultimately, we see that in the Bible, because of course things do happen in this fallen, broken world that we have to suffer through, and that's part of it. But so it takes a kind of a whole Bible perspective to get where we're truly secure in God, in Christ, and nothing in this world can hurt and harm us. And that's the way to to be drawn back into the goodness of God.
Yeah.
Though we are sinners and rebels against Him and are suffering lots of consequences from that in this broken world that has things like diseases and viruses and just an inability to cope with them. But if we have a right relationship with God, even in the context of those things, we can find security and peace, hope for our future, but we know that that's because God has promised one day a redemption from all this, and He promised it, like you said, in the garden. But we abide in Him, we walk with Him, we trust Him, and that one day He will redeem everything, and there'll be no more sickness or disease or death, even no more sin. And so that's a glorious thing.
Tell me if you think this. I talked about this a little bit this morning on a video I was doing, and take the theology of the Western world and how it's sunk into this kind of grace, like overly grace theology, where the vengeance of God is no longer preached. Like that's just been taken out. Like we don't talk that way anymore because our passive therapeutic culture, soft culture, whatever, however you want to say it, just doesn't respond well to it. So we don't talk that way anymore. Well, that compounds till you get to a place where that message can't be talked about at all. But do you think that maybe a lot of our struggle with the idea that bad things happen to good people and viruses and tsunamis and earthquakes and the things that we're talking about here is one of the problems is our lack of, like you said this, which made me think about it, the whole Bible teaching, right? And the fact that sin comes in, God promises to conquer it, and He does. But in the end, those who don't put their faith in Christ, that vengeance is coming for you, right? In the same way that vengeance fell upon Christ, His Son, so that we could have peace. If you don't look upon the Christ and that is your peace and have His blood, vengeance is coming for you, because vengeance is coming back into this world, and it's going to all start over through a judgment, right? Mm-hmm. Revelations is pretty clear. It's like a military campaign coming back into the world, right? Christ on a white horse, robe dipped in blood with a sword, baby. Like it's like vengeance is coming, and vengeance that is good. You said this, it's good. Like it's good and just and righteous and holy. And He's coming back in for all those people that have suffered for so long and dealt with the injustices of the world. Like there's some people in this world that if that's not true, they're never going to find justice, ever, right? But that justice is coming, and it's coming riding a white horse. He's not coming to hang on a cross this second round. He's coming to enact justice through vengeance, and it is good that He does so. And He's going to usher in the new kingdom, the new Jerusalem, where we're all going to dwell together forever, those who are in Christ. Those who acknowledge Christ as King are going to go live with their King. But do you think that maybe because that theology is taught, like you said, we zoom in on this like grace, and we don't have more of a global perspective of the Bible in that area, that's one reason our questions pop up? Because you said when a machine's broke in one area, all these other questions pop up. I was thinking about the same kind of thing with the way we teach theology. If you single focus on this, well, you got all these problems that pop up everywhere else because you're not knowing how to handle them, because you don't have a big picture sort of view.
Well, for sure, if our understanding of God is incomplete and then it will be inadequate to be in a functional relationship with Him, a healthy relationship. And, perhaps that, again, goes back to the garden where there's a lack of understanding or a doubt about who God is and His character from either angle. Whether it's the justice of God and His holy righteousness or His love and compassion and mercy. And people maybe stumble over one or the other of those, often not both, or perhaps both in some way, because if you misunderstand one, can you really get the other? But definitely, I think we have authority issues in our culture, this Western culture. I think it's been kind of taught to us, ingrained through education and in the wider culture, where we react against strong authority
Sure.
figures.
Sure.
And that's built in kind of to this American way on the one hand. But I think it's even like a newer thing, kind of from the counterculture movements of the 60s and
Yeah.
70s, perhaps after World War II. You have, Hitler, that was such a powerful, strong leader, and then this reaction against strong leaders or authority figures. And so but really we see it goes back to the garden. We want to rebel against any authority over us. We want to be our own king. But if God is king, then he has the right, even the obligation to uphold justice, and he's going to do that, and it's a glorious and righteous thing. And if you're on his side, and if you're submitted to his kingship, then you're eager for that, because it'll be good, or it'll set things right.
Sure.
It's not just like one of the examples, like what a human would do, where in our own insecurities and inadequacies, we're going to come and have vengeance just to pay somebody back for doing
Absolutely.
us wrong.
Not the same kind of vengeance.
Yeah, humans have wronged a holy God, one another, the whole creation. And so, and I think just going back to kind of those the relational dynamics that have been corrupted and aren't working correctly. So we've messed up with God. And so then, of course, that messes everything else up underneath it. And then when we try to relate to one another and creation, then, of course, that's messed up, because we have the wrong starting point perspective in terms of seeing what our relationship is. We're like at odds with one another. We're fearful. We're insecure. We are territorial, and all these things. We get greedy, and we're at odds with one another, versus seeing ourselves ultimately one with one another in Christ, through God, meant to cooperate together, work with the natural world under the authority of God's rulership, and understanding his wisdom and insight into how to live. If we want to know how to prosper in this world, then we need to, it's mandatory. Or if you want to figure that out fastest, then you go to the one who designed it in the first place, and he can tell you how to operate within it.
Yeah.
And so that's the way it ought to be. But of course, we don't do that. We ignore God, reject God, and then we think we know it all. So we go and we try to do it our way. And it just like perpetuates all the dysfunction, the malfunctioning of things. And so as societies along the way, and people attempting to work together for our common good, we just can't seem to get it right, and that's where we might either be at odds with one another in all kinds of ways that keeps us from cooperating well, but also, kind of in line with what you've been saying, like the way we build our society, kind of the infrastructure in place that whether it's, our hospital systems or our medical establishment relevant to this particular case, or other ways that we organize our economy, and the way we teach our children, the way we feed ourselves, like all these things that are just not what they could be or ought to be, because, we're not approaching them with full wisdom on how to do it right. We think we know better, and we try to do it our own way, and we just make a mess of things.
Because we make it to where you have to eliminate God before you ever come into them, right? So it's like you have to come at it from man-centered reason. Well, man-centered reason is always going to be kind of, try this, it doesn't work, okay? Try this, it doesn't, okay? Try, and so you're going to be, when you're fumbling through like certain things, that's very traumatic to society, right? It just is. And so say like like for instance, we all observe these things you're talking about too. You were talking about God, and then relationships with humans, and then relationship with the earth, right? How those three things broke down. Well, secular humanism sees the problem we're talking about, right? They see the problem from man to man, and they try to strive to resolve it through secular humanism, right? And then earlier you were talking about Prince Henry, these environmentalists, right?
Prince Philip.
Prince Philip, sorry. They see the problem, right? They see the problem environmentally. Now they don't recognize it as man and creation, but they see the issue there, right? And so they're trying to resolve it environmentally, right? And so people are seeing the 3-layer problem we're talking about. The only problem is they're not recognizing that the first problem you have to fix is the one with God before you can fix the one with human and the one with creation. If you start with humanity trying to fix that, or start with creation, what point of reference do you have to tell either one of those things that this is the right way of doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is no point of reference. It's 350 million points of reference, and you're just going to be in a bigger problem than what you tried to resolve before you get to the other end of it. Now, you said something in your talk, and I want you to touch on this because we haven't really touched on this side of it.